Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. You know, given the tremendous disruption of the workplace in 2020, it's time to focus on employees. You know, internal comms isn't just an email newsletter anymore, folks. With so many of us working from home and with workplaces and whole industries disrupted, communicating with employees has never been more strategically vital to organizations. And it's not just that. Adoption of technology to more effectively reach audiences is itself causing change and upheaval for marketers and communicators alike. So my guest this week, Ethan McCarty, the CEO of Integral, a thought leader in communications, employee engagement, and technology, has a uniquely informed perspective on all of this and more. So be prepared to be engaged and just a little bit geeky as we get up close and personal with Ethan McCarty. So let's get right into it. It's such a pleasure to actually sit down with a gentleman, and I'll use that term loosely as you'll figure out during this podcast, but Ethan has been a tremendous, a new friend and a tremendous influencer over the way I'm thinking about things like communications technology, or Commtech as we now call it in the biz. Look, Ethan is the CEO of Integral Communications Group. And did I get that right, Ethan?
Well, we just call it Integral these days because we're doing other stuff. But yeah, you got it. We were thinking about putting umlaut on one of the letters just to... Yeah.
Maybe a little accent grave or aigu.
I like the pronunciation.
See that? I whip it out just for you.
I like it.
Yeah. We served together on a committee to talk about Commtech with the Page Society, which is a society for communications, chief communications officers around the world, of which we are not chief communication officers, but we are certainly part of that community. And, Ethan's done a tremendous amount of work in the communications technology space, especially when it comes to employee communications. And the idea is that we want to look at digital communications as a mediating rather than a disintermediating force, and especially for employees. So we'll get into that a little bit as we go. But I really wanted to bring Ethan on because of this whole Commtech connection. Also because we have a lot in common in terms of the way that we approach employee communications, the way we're looking at the development and deployment of content, and a whole slew of different things. But first, what I really want to do is, first of all, welcome, Ethan. How you doing?
Thank you. I feel welcome.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
Why don't you kick us off here? Tell us about how you got to the point where you founded and became the CEO of Integral, and what led you to that, and what you're doing now.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that softball first question.
There you go, man.
I was born at a very early age, as they say. So anyway, I got into communications kind of through a side door. I have an undergraduate degree in creative writing and found myself writing a lot of nonfiction in general, essays and that kind of thing. And when I came back from living in Paris and kind of running around in the 90s with my not very valuable degree in creative writing, I lucked into the communications profession because at that moment, content was king. And in the mid 90s, the internet was happening. And I had the opportunity to go, I moved from Paris to New York, and that's where content was happening. And it was just so awesome because I was very interested in technology, being a musician. And I ended up writing about, kind of consumer electronics and music technology. And it was a fantastic time to be doing that because the world was going through this transition from analog to digital. Literally, people were getting fancy CD players and DVD players and stuff, replacing their cassette players and their VCRs and whatnot. And digital TV was new and all that. And I sort of made my mark a little bit writing about that technology as a journalist. And that was my side door into the comms profession because I ended up at IBM writing about high technology at IBM's research division, and ended up spending 13 years in a variety of roles at IBM. And it was also, completely lucky on my part that I happened to join IBM during the rise and tenure of John Iwata, who's a real industry thought leader and surrounded himself with such great people. And I had the benefit of their mentorship and tutelage along the way, and got involved in some really exciting projects and ambitious projects, which have formed my point of view. And one of them was, early on, I had responsibility for both internal and external, systems, intranet content and mechanisms, and external influencer stuff, particularly at IBM's research division. And I think that just sort of cast the mold in my mind that this idea of internality and externality particularly at an organization like IBM, which is vast, and then probably at much smaller organizations, is anachronistic at best. Like there just isn't really that differentiation between the two. And I think most people have come around to this point of view that, everything internal can be external. But, 20 years ago, we were sort of just having that thought really in some material ways as digital communications became the norm, And but that's informed my point of view all along. And I've just really enjoyed thinking about and creating the kind of systems that play that role in between organizations and their people, and these kind of, as you say, kind of digital, interactions that end up being, that end up activating people in positive ways rather than alienating them. And after 13 years at IBM, I went on to work at Bloomberg, which was just a phenomenal experience, and again a great leader there. Jason Schechter, who's still the chief communications officer there, brought me in to build let's call it a more strategic employee communications capability. Mm-hmm. My predecessor there, I think, did really great work, but they were kind of a subsystem in HR, really focused on kind of HR content. And I think Jason saw the opportunity to make that, make the communications from executives and make the communications amongst employees and employee presence in social media and so on a more valuable asset to the company. And so I had the opportunity to do that, which I spent several years doing before founding Integral, just a bit shy of 3 years ago.
Well, that's a heck of a journey. And Integral, it seems like if you really kind of hammered into your niche or niche. We talked about
I'm
this
going
before.
niche on this. I'm going
niche.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I like to say
I
either
speak
way.
really cruddy French, but I feel like if I'm speaking English, I'm going to say niche. And if I'm going to put the word in a sentence in French, maybe I would go niche. And I'd probably be wrong in both contexts. But I'm just going to...
Good.
That's where the chips fall for me. Or where the cheaps fall for me, I should say.
Well, we have to have comfort in discomfort. And, if I can't give you a little discomfort on this podcast, then I don't know what I'm doing right. But what you're saying and about your journey there and the differences between internal and external, or actually, just kind of understanding that those two things even exist is a relatively new development for a lot of companies, I think. And that organizations have audiences beyond their customers, right? That their customers are just one of the many audiences that organizations need to communicate to. And obviously that employee communications, employees as a stakeholder, employees as a key audience cannot be underestimated. And even, it doesn't matter how big or how small your organization is, your employees in many cases, are your brand. I mean, it's all about the relationships that you have with your stakeholders. Like your communications is all about developing and enhancing those relationships. Last time we talked, you said something about relationships being the meaning of life. And I don't know if you actually recall saying that, but you said relationships.
It's something I firmly believe.
Relationships are the meaning of life.
That's what makes meaning in my life, predominantly, yeah.
And that's where, communications, and I don't even want to say the word PR, because that's only such a small sliver of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But,
yeah,
communications, verbal, written, video, audio, all these different methods are just ways at getting at that relationship and building that relationship. But where I wanted to go with this is this whole idea of differentiating between the internal and external. I mean, I think there's like this general myopia among corporations. Maybe it's a blind spot, when it comes to communicating with your own employees. How has this evolved and what is happening in this field of communications?
Well, I think one of the things that's happening is the power dynamic. Like there's been a longstanding asymmetry in between organizations and the people who work there in terms of the power that they hold and how that power manifests, and often relationships and interfaces and messages and all these things are kind of predicated on this understanding that I think is changing quite a bit, and particularly when you look at the kind of quote unquote high end of the labor market, so people who are in coveted roles, whether they're like very, very highly skilled, artisans, or people who are, working in factory positions that require knowledge of, high tech and, kind of these knowledge workers, people with engineering skills and so on. Like it's the changes in that area of the labor market are enormously affected by the introduction of digital systems in general. I mean, like you have if you think about like your, 10 years ago, the most important network that you had might have been the people who you had on your, kind of internal email list or internal directory or something. And I mean, there's almost no one who would pretty much everybody would say LinkedIn or some version of that is their most important network now. So network portability has happened. Slack has made it so that your great practitioners can kind of take their network and go. Access to capital has changed, massively. So, the best people who want to do big things, they don't necessarily need to be, born rich or work for a company that can issue stocks or bonds. They can raise capital on the market. Just, go and GoFundMe or Kickstarter or, the access to infrastructure has changed fundamentally. So your high performers no longer need to have your HR department or your shipping and logistics or manufacturing even capabilities. They may be able to get all that stuff done. Like sort of the costs of those things are trending to zero or to variable costs. Same thing with getting education. It used to be the case that you would join these big companies because you would be able to kind of, learn there in these internal universities or some kind of, journeyman program, if you will. But now pretty much anybody can self-educate instantly or nearly so. I mean, there's a YouTube video and everything, or if you want to spend a couple bucks, go on Coursera. And I mean, you saw it with Google's announcement just recently, these the trend towards certification and away from 4-year programs. So there's, and that all of that is enabled by, digital scale, and to say nothing of the ability to communicate. I mean, that's also a big part of it. Like you no longer need, the sort of bullhorn of a big organization. And so even if you're the best people within your organization aren't going to go live in La Vida freelance tomorrow and they like working at the company and whatever, we're operating in an environment that a lot of the value proposition, the historical value proposition of big companies has eroded or changed. And so, and simultaneously, the guts of companies is more visible than ever. And so you can see, and people are making, we know this, consumers and citizens make decisions about whether or not they want to do business with you based on what employees are saying about you. And so there's this power dynamic that is, I think, very much in flux. And I think that's a huge opportunity for organizations to say, okay, instead of circling the wagons in this moment and trying to, make it hard, make our, sort of firewall like more impermeable to networking and people coming and going and so on. We're going to make our company stickier, instead of making it sort of like more like a prison. We're going to make it so valuable to have done some work with us or to be doing some work with us. And it's so easy. We're going to make it frictionless to have the best people come to us. And I think that there's a concomitant trend in kind of labor law and kind of looking at, what constitutes full-time employment versus, freelance or contracted. I mean, it's I guess I would just say everything's on the table, and we founded Integral with this idea that employees are your first public. And it's it's all of those things I just mentioned that sort of makes this more true than ever. And so savvy communicators need to be thinking about that as they advise senior leaders, as they develop programs and so on.
Well, it's interesting because employee experience it used to be regarded as the flip side of customer experience. you look at your customer experience as your main goal, and the employee experience has to all funnel up into that customer experience. You live for the customer. And in many ways, I think that still has to be part of the culture of any company because, of course, your customer is your critical audience. Is going to make the company move forward in terms of, selling something and, actually contributing to society. But to say that the employee experience is subservient to the customer experience is kind of off base now.
Oh yeah,
Right.
it's a very risky strategy. I mean, you can do that, but it's a very risky strategy. And at the end of the day, like, do you ever think over the long haul that employees who have a terrible experience will be hardwired to produce a great experience for your customers? I mean, it just is. To me, that is magical thinking. Mm-hmm. And particularly as more and more companies, and I'm going to steal an idea from Scott Galloway. He's got this idea of the Rundle, the recurring revenue bundle. Mm-hmm. More and more companies are moving towards subscription models where you have to like kind of create this experience for your customers. And it's not just software. It's like they're talking about like coffee shops, going to soap and everything. Exactly. Dog food, all these things are based on these relationships this ongoing relationship that you have. And a lot of it is experienced through customer service or mediated through a website where you might be interacting with somebody through chat and so on. But like that experience has to be like really frictionless and really great for the customer. And on the employee side, you have to be creating tools and experiences that would, if not incentivize people to, create these great experiences for customers, at least provide a version of it for them where they don't have to deal with the stress of cognitive dissonance every day. Like, look, we're creating this great thing for our customers, and yet we're like living on the edge of stress and pain. And, you see, like the luggage company, Away, was hoist by its own petard with that one, where you had this amazing brand and experience and people loving it and everything, and then it's revealed, that they have like a very toxic internal environment, and all of that stuff goes public. Why? Because of those same trends that I just told you. You have a newly empowered workforce, and we're talking about telereps. This is not like your $500,000 a year star coder who's leaking these things. These are normal people who are like, well, actually, I don't want to be treated like this, and I want my workplace to make me feel a sense of safety and security, and then I can really get along with this. And so it can't just be that there's a good kind of technical experience, internally with the interface, but also the interactions have to live up to what the brand espouses as its sort of purpose and brand and so on.
It seems that the whole idea of the company existing to kind of provide for the employee and the employee existing to provide for the company, this kind of mutual relationship, and together, the magic that they make then translates itself into a fantastic customer experience. Like that's probably maybe one of the simplest ways to think about it. But it seems like it's almost been full circle in some ways, because historically, I think originally companies had developed with that kind of intent to get people on full time and forever, right? The whole idea of lifetime employment. You become a company person, and you are, clearly the conditions of work in those days were nowhere near what they are now, and I'm sure that most employees, perhaps under today's standards, would feel like they were being taken advantage of or whatever. But there was the social contract there. That I know that I have to deal with a lot of crap.
Job for life,
benefits forever, pension afterwards. I'm going to deal with the nonsense, because there's going to be a lot of days where there's not nonsense. I'm going to go the way that I'm going to go within this whole company, because they're going to take care of me. Now, somewhere that fell out.
Yeah.
And now I think, the balance of power, so to speak, is much, much more dispersed.
Yeah, and dynamic. And I think, there's probably beyond the scope of this conversation, but there's been changes in the, sort of presence, particularly in the United States, of organized labor. There have been, massive externalizations of cost and risk from corporations to individuals. I mean, there's been a lot of changes to the technical landscape of employment. And I think, rather than talking about those, I think, the thing that we should probably focus on here is all right, well, what's a communications professional to do, or what's somebody who's interested in, not even as a comms professional, but as a leader in an organization or as an employee in an organization, what am I to do? And I think, at the end of the day, the value proposition of long-term employment with an organization has absolutely changed a lot. And I think this is part of what's driving the conversation about purpose so much, because people have, your identity is not a solitary, it's not like a grain of sand that you can see the whole thing at once. Like people's identity, it's more like identities. And we all know this. We all wear a lot of hats in our life. But if you think of it kind of as a set of concentric circles with kind of at the very center, your purest perception of yourself. And then the next ring is like the people who know you best. Maybe it's your family. I don't know. And then the next one is like maybe some of your extended family, your neighbors, your community. And somewhere in there's your professional circle. Like people know me as a communicator because I'm in the, in that, or my team at work, or my company, or my nation. Like there's all of these sort of circles. And I think, organizations that realize employees have needs across those and who do the least harm to employees who need to kind of traverse these different identities throughout the day. And that sounds a little sort of out there, but people feel tremendous, tremendous stress when they have to hold two ideas in their mind that disagree with one another. That's called cognitive dissonance. And if your company is saying something that you find outrageous or untenable or impolitic or offensive, and then later that day you have to cop to it that you work for that company in a totally different context. You're just telling your kid what you do or talking with your spouse or whatever. That is the kind of stress that drives the very best people in your workforce to leave, or the people who stick around to underperform, or the people who fail out to fail out. And so there's a huge opportunity for communicators to go into that space and say, look, can we true up who we are here? And it's possible, but it takes a lot of work, and there's no we'll deploy the intranet and there we're done. But it's a big, that's a big lift, but it's I think that's some of the most important work we can be doing.
Like there's a cognitive dissonance that comes from having basically different personas in your life. Right, having a way that you have to be outside of work and a way that you need to be inside of work, or trying to match the two when essentially what your workplace is doing is fundamentally against the values that you hold as a human being. And I had an employer in the past, one of my managers, phenomenal person, but she was very fond of saying, "You have to bring your best self to work." To bring your best self to work. Now, I mean, I think you have to bring your best self everywhere if you can.
Yeah.
But that implies that there's a not best self, or there's another self that you're not bringing to work. And I think, it's open to interpretation, I suppose, by the recipient of that kind of a bit of wisdom. But to me, it feels like I was being asked to be two different people.
Yeah.
And the flip side of that is—
How'd you feel about that, Dan? I'm serious.
Well, I felt, initially I was on board, right? So, that makes sense. I have to hold the line, you know, and whatever nonsense is happening outside of the door from the office, right? I come to work and it's okay. I can be who I need to be here. Now, on the one hand, it's kind of inspirational or aspirational, where I know in this place I have a safe space. It should be a safe place where I could grow and be my best self if I can't do that outside.
Yeah.
Maybe that's one way of looking at it. But another way of looking at it was whatever baggage or whatever stuff I have going on outside may be interfering with the way I'm looking at some things here. And now I have to put in some work, some mental work, some self-examination to understand why am I not bringing my best self to work?
Yeah.
What is it? So it goes around this cycle in your head. And I think it ultimately caused a little bit of stress to me.
Well, Dan Coyle, is a great one to read on this.
Yeah.
He's the author of The Culture Code.
Culture Code.
Yeah, great piece. I teach his book in my class, and his theory of high performing cultures is that those that are able to provide a meaningful measure of psychological safety are the highest performing cultures. Why? Because people can take risks, appropriate risks, because people can explore ideas, because people can take the anxiety and stress off the table, so the things that they should be doing at peak performance, they can do at peak performance because their performance is not degraded by that stress. And so one way, like a measure of a team culture or an organizational culture is to look at that level of psychological safety that people feel. So, but there are competing ideas about like what make up culture, and I would say, I like Ed Schein's model a lot as well, worth looking up. He wrote a book, I think it's called The Corporate Culture Survival Guide in the early 2000s. Really great stuff. And he just lays out, what are some of the factors, like the visible things, the artifacts, like that are espoused, like the values poster on the wall, and then behavior of executives and so on. And then kind of the inherited best practices are also definitional too. So he says a culture is, it basically is when a group of people work together, do stuff together for long enough that they figure out the ways they think are the best ways to do stuff, and it's valuable enough that they teach it to someone else. That's where the culture resides. And I think that's really powerful, because that is also something that comms folks can have a lot of impact on positively. And I think about like even at my company at Integral, like our first value statement is that we manage to our clients' reality. And it really comes from these two ideas around culture. So one of the things we want to do when we work with clients is we want them to feel psychologically safe working with us. Because if they're going to do their most ambitious, best, high impact work, they have to feel like, all right, when I checked in with the team, they asked me what's the project status, like we'll give you that, right? But like, how are you? What's going on here? What are you bringing to this meeting? What are you bringing to this conversation? And sometimes, especially this year of all, people will tell you things. Oh my God, like, oh yeah, like my mom's sick, and it's like, maybe right now is not the right time to be doing this. Let us take the burden of this work off of you for a minute. So there's, I don't know, I'm kind of a little bit all over the place, but I really think that culture, that culture of respecting that people have multiple identities at work, and whether you're in a kind of client situation or a colleague situation, if you can signal that at the outset of each of your interactions and meaningfully and really substantively, you're going to see your personal effectiveness go up, your team effectiveness go up, and it's a very powerful thing to build into organizational cultures if you can.
It seems like it's the role of communicators to, make sure that everybody in the organization is on board with this concept, and also to ensure everybody that they do have that psychological safety that you talked about. And there are numerous ways to get there, and I'm sure that we'll get to that in a second. But one thing that you brought up, or that sort of came up to me, is like, of course, right now we're in the middle of this. Unprecedented is a word that's way overused.
Yeah, that's right.
Because I bet if we look historically, there's probably some precedent to things, the plague and whatnot. But look, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. We've made tremendous adjustments and changes as a society. This podcast is an example of those kinds of transitions and changes people are making. The adoption of digital culture, the way that we can all be alone and together at the same time. The changes to the landscape are just beginning. The ripples are going to be felt for a very long time, and I don't think anybody truly knows how it's going to shake out. But what I wanted to ask you about this is that this has made a tremendous difference in the way that the workforce is deployed, and in the communication between and among employees, and having a distributed workforce, and really changes that whole the literal meaning of bring your best self to work, if work is at your house, in your basement or in your family room or at the kitchen table surrounded by kids,
Yeah.
your best self is very different. Yourself is different. But it's really changed the definition of the office. So given that distributed workforce, what do you think are kind of some of the key points of the new reality that you have to be on top of as an employee communications or employee experience communicator?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's been very exciting. I mean, a bunch of our clients have said things to me, along the lines of, geez, this is the moment we've been training for. Like I've been doing internal comms for 20 years. And, at best I was talking with the CEO, once a month or something. And suddenly, he and I are talking every day. And so I think it's, there's a growing appreciation that employee communications is a killer app, market differentiator. It's beyond a nice to have. And it is a strategic function. And it can no longer be the kind of province of, people who, kind of whatever, they were in some other role and they kind of get rotated through it or whatever, as often happens in organizations. There is actually a specialty around it. In fact, it was one of the things that was so exciting for me about going to work for on this class that I teach at Columbia in strategic communications. I've authored a course on employee activation rather than internal comms, and because I do think, and it's taught at the master's level, and it's serious, and it's the idea is like I would like to see more people go into employee communications. There are many people who get degrees in organizational communications, which tends to be a little bit different, but I think we're in a moment where the priorities have changed out of necessity so much. I mean, how many communications plans have been written for, that prioritized executives and then, managers on site, and so they could do a huddle with their team, and then then we're going to take a picture and print out a PDF and email it to the people who work at home. And they have this secondary diminished experience. Well, suddenly all those people, we have clients who their CEOs, we're doing work for their CEOs. They'd never really worked from home before. I mean, they work remotely a lot because they're on the road a lot, but suddenly they're getting this experience of holy cow, this is really hard. I'm at home and there's all these competing priorities and the dog and the kids and the,
Well, I mean, think about the effect of that on cultures that have never, ever had a remote work capability or even a thought. And I say this from experience because clearly I work for a Japanese company in my day job, right? And Japanese lifetime employment, Japanese style of work is very, very communal. Being together, consensus building in person, core to the culture. So this really has shaken a lot of people. Now, some in the leadership, the teams that I deal with, have been amazing in the way that they've adapted to this situation. And some have said, this is the first time in 38 years that I've ever worked at home, ever.
Yeah. Not
one time in 38 years have they not been either at an office or on site or at a customer.
That's exactly right. And they will have, through their own personal experience, I think this is, yes, we're helping companies roll out tools. We're helping them develop new practices for, accomplishing some of the interactions that they would like to do in person, but now they have to create some kind of simulacrum that is, virtual or whatever. We're helping companies do those things that are kind of the block and tackle. That was really more, I would say, the in the first part of this year. And now we're starting to work with companies that are thinking about all right, well, what are we going to do next year? This thing might carry on, right? And the conversation around resourcing, budgets, technology deployments, the composition and structure of teams, that's the work we're doing, and it all has the imprimatur of the CEO on it. And that is very different because I will tell you, having gone through several kind of cycles, as a agency head, and then having done innumerable ones, internally as, when I was at Bloomberg and IBM, generally the CEO is not like, well, how many people you got on internal comms? You know what I mean? But now it's like, oh my God, we need more help. And, what is our plan here? Like, what are the metrics? How are we sure we're even reaching people? Like, do I trust people working from home? Is it that kind of company? Or is this one of these ones where it's like, are we going to, let's rethink our whole model of, should we be doing a 5-day-a-week thing or what? I mean, like, all that stuff is on the table, needs to be thought through. And a lot of it ends up coming down to a partnership between HR, marketing, comms, and technology.
Yeah.
And, if you're not in that conversation, you'll be reporting on it, but hopefully you are. And, if you're in that conversation, like, that is your new team, and they have, you better have really, really good relationships. You better be at what we say is like, and we, Integral produced several guides during the kind of super shutdown period that we offered freely on our site, which I encourage people to go to, teamintegral.com if you want to grab one. But we basically said, look, the idea here is with this new team, you'd better be sharing data until it's awkward. And then you know what you should do? Make sure you go the next step, because you need to have a trusted, super trusted set of relationships with those other sort of capabilities within your organization in order to create an experience for employees that measures up to what we were talking about earlier. It has to be, maybe it doesn't have to be as good. I mean, you're not doing white glove, you don't have to do the kind of white glove treatment that you might do with your most important customers, but like don't be too far from that, but you're not gonna be able to do that just with emails and town halls, and like that's a big lift. And I think if there's ever been a moment where you can get the resources behind it, this is it. And it will be a strategic game changer. And some companies will come out of this pandemic with a whole new employee value proposition that is not just words on a deck. It's going to be experiential, and they are going to be, that's the winning strategy.
I was going to ask you where that's going, and that's exactly, what I think we were heading towards. I did want to say that there are going to be winners and losers after all this is said and done. When everything shakes out, I think we're going to see a mass employee movement as we've never seen before. Even now, I think I see a lot of people who are suddenly working at home. And, this is the scientific lot of people. I don't have a real sample size.
All my friends. I'm looking on Instagram and I see all my friends suddenly snapshots.
All my friends, therefore everybody. I'm the focus group of one. No, I had one of my recent guests, one of my good friends, Chris Bumcrot. He's the head of research at Sardverben, and he is just a gent. And he sort of gave a really great primer on research. I'm going to ask him to do one of these, cover his ears and la businesses as I talk now, because I'm basically saying that just based on my observation, no research at all. But I think that we're seeing people who are either biding their time and saying, okay, it's a bad time to change things, a bad time to move, it's a bad time to make a major life decision because we don't know what's going to happen next. And I'm fortunate enough to have a job, so I'm just going to stay where I am because I feel fortunate in that way. Like there's the usual motivations of why you want to change jobs or why you want to shift career are out the window because there's a very much different motivation right now, which is survival, just dealing with grief for many people, just getting through it to the other side. I mean, it's really that's a motivator that we've never seen, I think, probably in recent times. There's another motivator, which is, this is a dangerous time. People are sick. There's an unseen enemy or virus out there that can hit anybody at any time. So naturally, reflect on your mortality, especially if you're of a certain age. There's no guarantee that this is going to pass us by. And therefore, now is the time to take action. Now is the time to do interesting and exciting things.
Yeah.
Because you want to leave a legacy. You don't know when that legacy is going to be, when somebody or something suddenly puts the kibosh on that legacy. By the way, I told you I'd fit that in somehow.
You got the kibosh in there.
I got the kibosh.
I've got my Dan Nessel bingo card here. And
there it is.
I'm almost full.
Yeah, and to my listeners out there, is it kibosh or is it kibosh? Because the ongoing argument I've had with several of my friends is it's kibosh, because that's the way a lot of Americans say it. I've always said kibosh, always.
I'm with
Ethan
you on kibosh.
Happens to agree with me.
I'm 100%. I'm a kibosh. They call me Ethan Kibosh McCarty sometimes. Yeah, but I think you're right about the, I mean, the most successful businesses reputedly are formed in downturns, not in upswings. And I mean, there's like some basic economics that drives that, like everything's on sale during a downturn. People will work for less, real estate's less, the cost of materials less, all that kind of stuff. You have to be scrappier, capital is harder to come by, blah, 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 all those things. And so, there are technical reasons, I think, beyond the emotional ones that sort of like pay off your point. Like if you're thinking about, I mean, granted, I started Integral when things were quite rosier. Mm-hmm. When I started this company, I was like, I thought that the markets were frothy. This is like almost 3 years ago. I was looking at the average PE ratios of stocks and just being like, oh my God, like I should just be sitting here on like, I don't know, gold coins or something. Like I should cash it all in. So I started the business with a growth mindset, but with a kind of scarcity outlook. It's a little hard for me to describe that, but basically saying like, all right, can I start a company? It could end at any time. Yeah, let me start a company that is going to be like really scrappy, lean, doesn't have a lot of, kind of just goofy wastage, and has variable costs built into everything, which again, it's like that digital thing. Like, I mean, you can basically start a company on a credit card in an afternoon, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in these days, because all of like manufacturing, hiring, even the provisioning of benefits and legal and all that kind of stuff, all of that is variabilized now. So you can really be scrappy and be able to scale up and scale down as needed. And so, I think in some ways I've benefited from that. I went for 20 plus years at big organizations. I mean, come on, IBM and Bloomberg. Yeah. The ultimate, I was like very much a sort of inhabitant of the corporate world, as like people call folks back in the office the carpet walkers. Like I was definitely had very very comfortable shoes on for many years, rather than sort of hitting the streets and the shoe leather of trying to entrepreneurialize. And but I think it's for people who are thinking about doing something right now, I think you got to be, I don't know about the inspecting your own mortality. That may be. I don't think that was a big driver for me so much as I was like, what do I want to be doing every day? Less so than what is available to me at this particular organization right now. And I think, if you answer that question, for me, like I said to you when we talked a while ago, relationships are everything. And particularly over the past decade, as I've focused on my professional relationships, I have made many professional friendships that are as meaningful to me and as valuable to me as friendships that I've made in other ways, like people who I'm still friends with from college or or in the neighborhood or met through, taking my kids to school or whatever. And I realized that, in this agency that I run, I can really spend a lot of time with these people who I think are great, yourself included. I mean, others through the Page Society and through PRSA and through my, I've been in the kind of doing conferences and publishing things. These relationships are really meaningful, and that's how I want to spend my time. And so that's what I'm doing, and I really enjoy that. It's a choice.
And it's an important choice. I mean, now I think more than ever we are doing that. We're making those choices and abiding by them. You see more people saying, there's less of, we should get together someday, and more of, let's get together next week. I have a Zoom opening at 3:00. Come on, here's my invite. Let's go.
Yeah. And I'm seeing an abundance of newly cast, yoga instructors and painters and people taking up, artisanal this and that. Like I actually really do like my, and maybe it's more of like a, talk about like, totally weird samples, but like the people who I'm connected with on Facebook and Instagram and stuff, like the number of people who are like, yeah, I'm like really into, like I never made a knife before, and now they're like making a knife, or they're like, and of course there's like a billion people who are like making bread now and like all that. I
Sure,
think people,
that's my house.
yeah, you're stuck in your home and you're like,
You've
oh, what do I
described
want
the
to be
whole
spending my
situation.
time doing? And I went into this business thinking the big thing that's going to take a hit, the big sacrifice that I was looking into was not financial. What I was looking into was like, oh man, like my, at the time, 4-year-old and 7-year-old, or what, I guess it was 3 and 6 or whatever, like I'm going to spend less time with them. And in the first year and a half, 2 years of Integral, it was absolutely true. I was on a jet a lot. We have clients all over the US, and I was flying around, and suddenly I'm not. And that like the amount of time that I spend with Zev and Avi, my sons, and my wife Sarah has like gone up 10x, and it's been amazing. We're like playing all these games and like going hiking and like all these things, and it's it's the anyway. It was something that I thought I was going to really lose out on, and now I haven't, and so. I don't know what my point here is. Like,
well, I think
it's the mortality thing. You got me thinking
it's
about
the mortality,
my kids,
the
Dan.
motivation, the motivation for doing things. Like, I mean, you're absolutely right. That's who knew? Who knew? I mean, this is the thing. Like suddenly 6 months ago, I was on a plane. 70 to 80% of my life was traveling. And my kids are a little older than yours, but they're now they're 14 and 16. But teenager girls. So frankly, I have teenage girls. I was perfectly fine to be out of the house for 75% of my time. But now I'm home. I mean, I've been home constantly since March 5th. I mean, every single day. I haven't gone anywhere. And it's done wonders for my family life and for just getting to know my kids.
At first you're like, oh, wow, who are these people? They're irritating. And then, you get to know them and it's like, oh, wow, they're my family. Let's hang out.
Exactly.
Or I don't know, maybe I'm projecting.
Which brings me to my next topic, actually.
Commtech.
No, that's right. In fact, I was trying to, I knew that I wanted to get to this with you.
Yeah, but how do we
And
do
the segue, I think the segue there is, we are all far more dependent on technology now being remote than we ever have before. And that's nothing new. Everybody knows this. But when we talk about Commtech, we're not talking about the fact that everybody's got Zoom now. We're talking about a much larger movement almost. Yeah. Look, Ethan and I have been on this committee, like I said, to talk about Commtech. I've been a practitioner of B2B marketing communications. Since I did the work to get a degree in digital marketing, I kind of know a thing or two about it. But that was already almost 10 years ago, so my degree is just paper at this point. But the idea is that all of the great things that marketers have been doing for a long time now in terms of quantifying, measuring, identifying their audiences, and actually interacting with them using tools and fancy things like analytics, has of late, I'd say, hit the communication space. Part of that, I think, is because communicators have wised up to the fact that they do need to reach their audiences where their audiences live, which is primarily in digital environments. But it's also because communications in general, has to take a much larger seat at the table because, frankly, with customers and employees, with customers, stakeholders as empowered as they are now, the way to reach them is no longer through advertising. It is now through narratives and storytelling and content, the tools of the communicator, and among other things. So, anyway, point is that communicators have really started to embrace this, but so many have grown up in the age of press releases and fax machines. It's making its penetration into the professional world of communicators kind of slowly. But anyway, Ethan is one of the thought leaders in this space, and certainly among the people that I've met at the Page Society, has been a driver of the conversation. Of course, under the tutelage of John Iwata in many ways. We've moved forward with this, and it's been a privilege for me to be part of that committee from the kind of the business side of it. I think I kind of defined Commtech, but let's see what I missed. So Ethan can talk about that and why is it important, and what's your view on it right now?
Well, thanks for asking, because it's something I'm really into. I mean, one of the things that you pointed out rightly, but I think is changing, is this kind of split between marketing and communications. And in many organizations, they're together or nested in some way. And in other ones, it's like the Montagues and the Capulets, and there's like this, feud going on, and you're just waiting for Romeo and Juliet to come out there and be like, can't we all just get along?
And then everybody dies.
Yeah, and then then they drink poison, and I don't know, somehow the demand funnel is fulfilled. So, but I mean, again, I had, through total dumb luck, not through some like strategy of my own, but in IBM, I had the opportunity to be around for the moment when marketing and communications came together, and I had to be rather like my sort of department and work efforts and so on were quite in the middle of all that. And so I just stopped thinking about those things as separate, really. I mean, I think they're you could, in terms of like maybe allocating budgets, there's some utility in being like, oh, this is a marketing budget versus a comms budget or something like that. But I don't necessarily think of that as a very productive differentiation, because the people you care about don't give a damn. There's no customer on planet Earth who's going to come to your company's, name the asset, website, article in the paper, interaction with a salesperson, in-store experience, anything, and say like, I'm just going to give them a pass on this crappy experience because it probably came from comms and I'm more of a fan of marketing. Or like the opposite. You know what I mean? Like that just is not going to happen. Yeah. There will be no candidate who comes to the employee website and says like, yeah, I would have taken this job if marketing made this page instead of, or if comms made this page, it would be so much better and I would take this job. But instead I'm going over to Google, second choice. Yeah. It's just not happening. And so I think one of the things is like that is happening and should happen. And I think it's natural. And I think there's, people who are wedded to these distinctions are going to have, you're either going to have to fight it or you're going to have to figure out some way to reconcile or partner or what have you. So that is happening. And at the technology level, that is happening too, as you rightly pointed out. Like a lot of the instrumentation that has been available to marketing because of its historically closer alignment to sales, and because it has been a more capital intensive operation. Historically, marketing has been, the reason why I had all this capital attached to it is you had to buy time. You had to make assets, expensive things, commercials, and then buy time to have them in front of people. And, that was kind of the monopoly. It was like, for marketing. For comms, it had like a regulation-driven monopoly to draw a market comparison. If you talk to the press, we'll fire you, so you have that regulation in play, but not as capital intensive. And so, you don't need a lot of money to staff that enforcement. You need people, right? And so, the instrumentation, the investment to manage those assets, the time, the development of creative and so on, went to marketing. And so the technological development, this is my read of corporate history, but sure, the technological development went that way too because it's closer to revenue and the attribution was easier to draw and so on. And so it was able to like have that flywheel of being able to prove ROI. But at the end of the day, both organizations are in the business of kind of shaping public perception and interactions and experiences with an organization, like the marketing capability, the communications capability. And the more in sync they are, the better, because at the end of the day, like the categories that we see Commtech emerging in, and now I'm finally answering your question. What's Commtech?
It's fine.
The way we talk about it, and me and the team with you on it, and Brittany Paxman and other people through Page, the kind of technical definition that we came up with is Commtech applies data and analytics to create communications campaigns that engage a range of stakeholders as unique individuals based on their behaviors, beliefs, and interests to drive desired actions and outcomes. And so that's kind of the technical, like we felt pretty good about that. You could quibble on word, like what's a campaign or whatever, fine. But like good, like that's our MVP, or minimum viable, blah, blah, blah. The four areas that, like you'll actually see like what's the meat of it. It's content, relationships, insights, and then the workflow around it. So like you will see in Commtech solutions, you'll see stuff that will help you get the right content to the right person, to produce that content, to deal with its life cycle, promote it, and so on. You'll see, software. You'll see technology that helps you do that. With relationships, you'll see software, different kinds of software. Sometimes it's in a suite, sometimes it's a standalone thing that helps you keep in touch with people who matter to you and help you connect with them in useful ways and maybe even bring them together around stuff. You will see in Commtech mechanism, like tools to create insights, like to understand what's trending, to combat misinformation or disinformation, to measure things like performance of campaigns or assets or the outcomes, to visualize that data. You'll have this insights kind of like category, and then last but certainly not least, you have workflow. So like there's a lot of tooling around tracking what you're doing and developing all that creative effectively and efficiently, and staying, making sure that you're not off brand or violating somebody's rights, and are you updating people, and so in each one of those categories, you have software, software solutions that stand independently, and then you also have some that work across the board. And I will say, like, we are my company Integral is in the middle of doing a major marketing transformation for a big company right now. We're implementing a big, well-known software suite for marketing. Same four categories. And it's the same stuff. So I really don't fundamentally see a difference, but I do see a lag in the adoption curve for, as I said, kind of historical reasons that are kind of like corporate history that, I don't know, maybe someone will write a book about it, or somebody has written a book about it, and it'll be like a dusty tome somewhere. But I don't think the reasons are, to me, I guess the reasons are interesting, but I think it's more like when you look at what communications professionals need to use to instrument their work to get the most out of it, it sure looks a lot like MarTech. But there are some peculiarities to our profession, and so there are likewise some solutions that appeal to us.
That's about as good a summary as I could ask for, and anybody could probably ask for that matter. And I know that it's a good summary because we worked on that.
Yeah, we worked together on it.
What's interesting to me is this whole, marriage of communications and marketing. I think that there's going to be a future where neither of those terms are going to be used anymore for us collective people who are making relationships with other people. It's about those stakeholder relationships and whether those stakeholders are employees or customers or potential customers or government executives. These different audience groups are often the criteria by which we separate, whether this belongs to the marketing people or this belongs to the communications people.
Yeah.
Now, rather than rather than what exactly it is that you're trying to put out there into the marketplace. So you're using the same tools, you're using the same methods in many ways, just some of them, some different channels.
The thing that I get concerned about overstating, I don't think everybody's job role is just going to become one big blah, who knows what department we're in. Because there are things that people specialize in and they do really well, and it's great to have kind of a locus of that capability somewhere and be able to identify it and say oh, well, we need more of that or less of that or whatever, and be able to kind of appreciate it or celebrate it or wind it down if it's no longer useful. And I think there are things that marketers do, and that people who have gravitated towards careers in marketing, they have done and do exceedingly well. And that there are things, for example, the long-term planning that it takes to pull off great events or great advertising campaigns, and the ability to target down, that is really unique, and that is really special. And I don't think that becomes automated and who cares. And in the comms profession, that that super senior relationship building, particularly when it comes to these managing adversarial relationships, with a journalist or whatever, and managing that, and with precision, with care, and with integrity. And crisis communications, and there are things that comms people do that are unique to. So I'm not saying it's all nonsense and whatever, but I do think the fundamental tooling that would make people in the artist formerly known as marketing or the artist formerly known as communications excel at their job and provide a lot of value and have a good time doing it and be able to like feel like their work is meaningful. Fundamentally, I mean, the kind of, the tools are the same. It's what you build with it might be a bit different.
Yeah. And that's interesting because there's a whole discussion now about what are the new skills that people need moving forward, in our profession. We're several decades in. I mean, we've been there. We've built that. I mean, I have to keep my skills sharp in many ways. I'm always evaluating new tools and being trained on new things and reading a lot. What I'm seeing is the need for more and more analytical skills, more and more math that a lot of, I think, people who got into marketing and into communications were sort of doing it because there wasn't any math in this
Comms
class.
especially, I think.
Especially
like
comms.
I hear comms people say, like, oh, this is communications people math, and they're like rounding up from a billion or something, like.
Well, I mean, the last thing I want to hear anymore is that this is fluffy.
Yeah. No, and you know what got me out of that habit, and this is, it's like I've had a lot of dumb luck in my life, but at one point I was on, for a couple years, the IBM annual report team, and I had, it was like, that was my MBA. If there's any advice I can give to people early in their tenure or anywhere in their tenure in communications, is like be on the financial reporting team for some period of time. Because I mean, you're talking to somebody who got a degree in creative writing, followed by a master's degree in liberal studies from the New School. Like I did everything I could to avoid math. I took like physics for poets and like all that stuff. Botany, anything I could avoid math. And then I found, look, if you want to be taken seriously as an executive, you got to do it. And I think that, I think because it's more capital intensive generally, I think the marketers kind of got into that, being able to, gain the trust of the C-suite with, millions and millions of dollars, or billions of dollars in some cases of essentially discretionary spend, like investment spend, and that came from being able to apply the rigor of, analyzing the ROI.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast today, the most recent edition of the Marketing Companion, which is with Mark Schaefer and Brooke Sellis, and they were talking about this topic about skills that are necessary, and they both landed on analytics and math. And Mark said everybody should get a fundamental understanding of statistics. Basically,
oh, yeah.
It doesn't matter. Just learn statistics. You don't even have to have a formal education. You just have to get a feel for it. And I think to me, it's like if you're afraid of math, right? You don't have to go and suddenly crack open a textbook. You just have to, I think you have to get into a mathematical mindset.
Yeah.
There's a difference between knowing math and being mathematical.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, so I was teaching a course called Digital Media and Analytics at, again, still at Columbia. And I was amazed. So I taught really some basic concepts in statistics, like honestly, very basic, because I'm no statistician. How to read charts, how to present data, primarily because we were showing people how to create data visualizations that were persuasive. And so I showed some that were, essentially specious. I mean, like they're designed to lie to you. And I was amazed at the number of people, some of whom are executives in the course, couldn't really identify them. And I mean, I think it's important to understand how to interpret what is being presented to you at a minimum, particularly if your job is to tell the story about it. And I would say, I guess, going back to your point about learning statistics or kind of math, I mean, the way I would put it would be learn business acumen.
Yeah,
that is key. Adopt a the kind of growth mindset, as it's often called, like this kind of adaptability and dynamic view of the world. Those are the two things. I mean, I'm looking for that when young people come and talk with me about a position at Integral. I'm like, okay, does this person understand the business that we're in, or any business? Does this person understand some aspect of business? And is this person the kind of person who is almost like a polyglot, like wants to retrain themselves constantly through their own experience? And I think after that, and that's kind of more attitudinal, I guess, but like those two things, I think you can have a very high impact career in communications, marketing, whatever, if you have those two. And probably, I mean, now I'm like really going out on a limb, but probably in any field. I mean, I guess like I can imagine Yeah, like why wouldn't a scientist or an engineer like also like if they understand business and they have this aptitude for adaptability, like why wouldn't that be those just feel like in this world where we're all kind of players on a in like a global marketplace, as individuals. Like why wouldn't those two things just be like kind of the universal talent key?
They should be, especially the growth mindset part. I've been doing a lot of research into that lately, and for sure, I think I know a lot of people who again, this is my deep research, but I know a lot of people who have decided that I'm not good at math, so I'm not going to just do that. I'm just going to let somebody else do that, or I'm not going to. For our purposes, you need to be able to know what you don't know, and say, you know what, I'm going to take on that challenge. I'm going to grow. That's something I want to learn, something I really need to learn to do well in my job.
I had a manager a zillion years ago at IBM who's just I had great managers at IBM. I had one who identified in me a reluctance to get into the numbers. And this manager just gave me responsibility for the departmental budget. It was like, I was like, oh my God, you are killing me. I hate this. And it was like, yeah. So you hate that. So let's talk in, a few months about how you feel. And what was amazing is like, I had to like figure that out. It was like really I mean, like the budgeting process at IBM is Byzantine or it was, I don't know if it's probably better now, I hope. And it was a real pain, but with that understanding, I was able to make decisions about the department and be a consigliere. And then suddenly that turned into soft power, and that turned into responsibility that had to be exercised, had to be exercised, and discretion. Like you learn not just the math, like I learned how to like use Excel, but it was also, it was a huge like put on your big boy pants moment for Ethan,
Look, I've been in that situation, and to me, the big kind of aha for me was that math didn't suck, and I was always a good math student. But what got me was it's not the numbers, it's the context. So once you understand that there's this whole kind of ecosystem of decisions that are being made, of analyses that are happening, of even sentences that are being written that are based on these numbers, or that are where these numbers are part of the whole, it makes it easier to really understand, certainly, especially if you're from a creative mindset where you're like, oh, okay, I kind of get it now. These are puzzle pieces. I can build a puzzle. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And that was a good way to think. That helped me a lot. So anyway, back to the Commtech, I wanted to kind of cover a little bit about, what Commtech is, and we did that.
There's one thing I wanted to add about Commtech, if I may.
Please.
So one other thing I would say that we're doing around Commtech at Integral is we've identified the kind of space where employee activity and Commtech, intersect. Yeah. And there's we would take those same categories that we talked about a little bit ago, the content and the relationships and the workflow and insights. And those capabilities, there are specialized software that are, kind of pointed at employee interactions, whether it's on your sort of domain, in intranets and mobile apps and so on like that for employees, or collaborative tools and so on, or off domain, things like, are there, what tools can we use to encourage employees to advocate for the company? And my team and I put together a list of about 400 that we knew about. And over the summer, just started to, we started a database and started to describe those. And we just, in lightweight ways, because, there are very few things that kind of are unified across all of these different kinds of software. Some things like, is this really appropriate for an enterprise, or is it really for an individual user, or for a big enterprise, or for a small enterprise, or is the pricing for this, something where you're going to be in like a long-term thing, or is it like I just buy it once? I mean, there are a few things, few characteristics like that we were able to say sort of spread across them all. But then also just saying, is this predominantly about content, or is this more about relationships, or is this both, or And then we started to we started to look at that list, and questions come to our mind, because we just wanted it internally for ourselves, because it comes up like all of our clients use a different recipe. Like they've got, this one company is on Microsoft, but they're using a Unily, blah, blah, blah. And then they've got the mobile app from so-and-so, and then it's, Populo for email, whatever, I wanted my team to be able to like at least go in and like know something about those things. And now we're finding that the internal work that we did is useful to other people, and we're starting to build a web front end to it. And I'm hoping that this month, the month of October, we're going to expose like a very MVP, minimum viable product version of that. And product is generous because it's not a product. It's just we just want to make our own work, sort of expose it to other people and say like, okay, it's useful for us. Is this useful for you? And then we'll also, so you'd be able to go onto our site and like take a look at that list, so to speak. I mean, it's a database, so you can kind of search it and so on. And then also say what's missing here, because I suspect once you show it, I mean, there's it's a couple dozen people in my company. Like that's not a very big sample size, but like if a few hundred people looked at it, we might get some really interesting ideas or get some really interesting feedback. So anyway, that's coming up, and I'm excited to see what people say about it. And if there's useful, I hope it's useful.
I'm really looking forward to that myself because, first of all, I get geeky on those kinds of things. I like to see the different tools and things that are all around us, about us.
Get your geek on, Dan.
We've got to get the geek on. One thing that keeps coming up again and again in conversations is how do I choose the right thing for my particular need? And our organization is different, or this team is different.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of tools when you count things that have been cobbled together in-house.
Oh my God. And God bless them, those software as a service salespeople, like they are equipped with the best tools. So like if you indicate interest, they're going to follow you. Like you're going to be getting emails from them like until the sun literally goes supernova. Like the sun will be like white dwarf. And there's going to be like, just checking in, Dan. Would you have time, like 15 minutes next week? Like I'd love to just talk about your needs and like the challenges you're facing. Oh my God. So like that's one thing that we're trying to maybe help out with is for the discerning communicator who just wants to see a list without getting spammed to death for the rest of their life.
Well, I mean, we don't know about half these tools, and sometimes it's those software service salespeople who are contacting us through, LinkedIn Sales Navigator or whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever brand of ABM software they're using. Look, I don't hold a grudge. I think they're doing their job, and you know what? It's really helped me see a lot of what's out there.
I've bought software that way. It works.
I've bought software that way, but
they're doing it because it works,
doing their
and
job.
it is a service. It is valuable. I wish they'd chill out. I wish they'd stay home sometimes, but
I wish they'd read the room a little bit, understanding that, this is a timing when there's not a lot of investment happening.
You don't walk into a party and ask, with a bullhorn, for, everybody for their phone number, like, peace, maybe warm me up, but okay.
But, they're doing their job. They got something to do. I get it. That said, there's a lot out there. And I'm looking forward to what you guys put together so that we can help put a little sense to the world. And some of the conversations we've been having at Page are aimed at that purpose as well. So there will be, I'm sure there's going to be more work on that. And, once that's made available to the public, we can talk about that again and
I'd love to
see where that's going.
We'll see. The biggest win for me would be if we put this thing up and we get a bunch of feedback of like all the things that suck about it. Because seriously, if people saw this, it's like very simple technology. We're putting on like a very basic little database with a web front end, right? Like this. But if people said like, man, you did not talk about the XYZ factor that's, like so important to me, or like, how could you post this up and not include the, blah, blah, blah technology? Like that would be like winning the lotto. Because feedback is a gift. That would be a big gift. And the more wrong we get it and the more people, tell us, the more better we can make it on the next rev. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
You know what I'd like to see, and I'm not, of course, it's your tool, so, I'm just channeling you for a minute. I would like to see that people come up with ways to combine these tools to do new and interesting, exciting things.
I love it. Recipes. That's where I think it needs to go, but I'm not sure how to instrument that yet, but I think that would be a really cool thing if you just ask people like, all right, what are the 3 things that you got running in your shop? Is that like a
feedback, discussion board, that kind of thing?
Like, are you making a dynamic signal, Populo, Microsoft casserole, or what is it? Is it taco? What do you got in there?
There's still no like magic wand for predictive work. like
Yes.
predictive analytics and so on. So you're going to see people saying, well, I combine this stream with this data, and then I put in 300 hours of reading stuff. And then, then I come up with an algorithm that tells me, oh, this content is going to be big in the next 6 weeks. Like that's that would be so golden and really fantastic for, for anybody inside who produces content or
That's version
who's looking
2.0.
for audience. Yeah. Well, we'll get there. And I'm looking forward to that.
We've got a lot of dot level releases before we get there, Dan.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I do appreciate you coming on for so long. I really have had a great time with this conversation,
Same here.
Ethan. And I know this is just one of many that it's one of many that we're going to have because
I agree.
I think just like you said, relationships are the meaning of life. And this is a very meaningful, life-affirming conversation I've just had with you. I really appreciate it. And folks out there, if you want to know more, and you should know more about Ethan and what he's up to, you can, of course, check him out on LinkedIn, and it's Ethan McCarty, and his name will be spelled in the title of this episode. Or go to teamintegral.com. That's teamintegral.com. Teamintegral.com. That's another one. Integral or integral? I think they're both correct. So teamintegral.com.
I'm not correcting anybody. I like them both. Thank you for the plug. I'll take it.
No, you got it. And it's been a pleasure. I thank you so much for your time.
And you, Dan.
If you enjoyed this episode of The Dan Nessel Show, please head on over to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or the podcast player of your choice to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. And please don't forget to spread the word. Thanks for listening.